Welcome to Brad and Zach's Popular Music Podcast.
We appreciate your ears.
It's episode 11, featuring an amazing conversation with Glen Phillips.
This episode is about how to conceptualize and start a song, and our guest today is Glen Phillips.
Glen is a founding member of Toad the Wet Sprocket, a band that was formed in the 80s and is still going strong today.
Toad has had world tours and both gold and platinum albums.
Also, Glen has released a number of solo albums, and he has a new one called There's So Much Here, which is out on November 4th, 2022.
As a heads up to our listeners, as we get into this interview, Glen is going to mention a songwriting game.
Matt the Electrician is a singer-songwriter from Austin, Texas, who has put together the songwriting game that Glen and 20 other people are part of. Before we get started, we would like to tell you about our commemorative mugs. We are in the process of creating a commemorative mug for each episode. When you purchase a mug, not only are you able to celebrate your favorite episode and artist, but also you help to support the We Appreciate Your Ears podcast. Simply go to weappreciateyourears.com and click on the merch link.
Glen, thanks for being here with us today.
Let's do it.
When you're writing, do you have to put yourself in a special space to receive a song idea? Would you just talk about your process there? Like at the beginning, when that moment when you kind of first spark an idea, you hear the melody, maybe or a riff or words, or I'm just curious how your process goes.
I find I either have to really sequester myself and intend to write and make sure I don't have distractions and get out my guitar and, just spend the time, or I need to be exploring something. Sometimes I think the computer and plugins or sounds or whatever are good to just be an exploratory start, like let my curiosity go somewhere and see where that leads, or I need a prompt or an assignment, whether it's writing specifically for some purpose or the songwriting game I'm part of where it's like every week, you're kind of a jerk if you don't write your song. So you get the title and you got to do it. And I find more and more I need something to be writing for. So it's either the game or a project or, Toad will be working on something. And at this point, it's like, okay, what's a Toad song? How's it different from a solo song? How's, counter melodies, and that I can count on all kinds of kind of melodic and instrumental things being taken care of that I leave space for. And, that there's a different criteria.
Yeah.
It's weird, after having kids, I lost a little bit of that, just natural desire to go in and explore on my own. It felt like there were all these things to take care of and people to take care of. And so I find I have to much more carefully carve out creative time and a writing season.
Mm-hmm. Do you make that a daily practice, or is this something that, running for you, that you just do? Or is it, something you say, on Tuesday and Thursday, I'm going to sit down from 10 to noon.
I repeatedly intend to make it a daily practice.
Yeah.
But I think also there's a bit of it that's kind of experiential consumption and regurgitation. So it's like I need to spend time living and thinking about things. And I'll have a bunch of concepts or subject matter that I'm kind of kicking around in my head. So there will be periods where it's kind of the preparation so that I have material to write about. And there's also it's like right now I'm getting ready to release an album. I'm not writing as much because I'm doing all this other kind of creative work or simply just donkey work. And but I seem to have seasons where I'll go through a period where there's a lot of gathering of material, and then the processing of the material is the writing place.
Hey, Zach, let's cut away here for just a second. When I met Glen, he was 17 and Toad was just a local band. But it was remarkable that the band had completely realized songs. Everything worked: lyrics, composition, arrangements, harmonies. There was a real depth. How old were you when you first started writing real complete songs? And then why did you decide to write those in the first place?
one of my very first songs was this like lovesick 8-minute anthem because I'd been listening to a lot of Rush. So I thought all songs should be long form. And it was about this girl named Janet from Syracuse that I met at Interlochen Arts Camp in the summer after 8th grade. And so that was probably my first like song that wasn't just like a joke between friends. I mean, I was more into theater as a kid. I felt I needed creative outlets and that I was going to be an artist of some kind or another. And songwriting's a great form, I think, just because you can handle, it's one idea at a time. It's not like a novel or a film or these, large, you can kind of do one idea and you're trying to get a single mood or a single concept expressed reasonably well. And so when the band started, I think also nobody else wanted to write lyrics, and lyric writing was natural for me. And so I just kind of stepped in. There were stories I wanted to tell, and there were things I wanted to say, and stuff I was thinking about. And I was always kind of brooding and over-serious in certain ways. And so that just kind of came out pretty quick.
That's, I think, where mature songwriters get. But the fact that you were doing that like between 8th grade and 10th grade, because when I met you, there were these songs that were completely like phenomenal songs. Was that something you really worked at? Did you take songwriting classes or even literature classes, or did you just pick that up from being in theater, or how did that happen?
I mean, I listened to a lot of music, but I think, and I read a lot of books, and luckily I didn't grow up in an era where we could entertain ourselves to death, right? Like you didn't have screens everywhere. TV time was limited, so you were reading or you were making. There was a lot more of an observational era, and I think part of that is just being lucky we grew up when we did, when there's less distraction and more opportunity to think and fill your own time. And I think probably my dad, more than like having a creative discipline, it was my dad's curiosity that I really mirrored and identified with. He would want to know the details of everything. And he wasn't easily convinced that his first impression of something was all there was to know about it. I remember how many of my friends, like when he passed away, talked about how much they loved talking to him because he would always just want to know. He would always ask, "You're doing that? What's that about?" Like he was a constantly curious and open person. And so I think having that attitude as well, like, I think of early songs, like with the first Toad album, there was Way Away, which was, about a kid in town who he'd taken a bunch of acid and walked through a glass window. And I knew a lot of people who knew him kind of in the punk scene in Santa Barbara. And so his funeral was like half the Santa Barbara punk rock scene and half the Santa Barbara Mormon community. And that it was these two communities. And and that's the kind of thing that sticks in my head. Instead of just going weird, I go, wow, what would it be like to be like his friend? And what would it like to be his mom? And how would his mom interpret these? Like, would she be hating them or appreciate that they loved him? And would they be thinking it's just like that ability to kind of keep asking, which I think is for me, where songwriting lives is this ability to kind of zoom in internally and then zoom out and capture, have the same concept, but have like this very, distant, Lawrence of Arabia view of it, and then zoom back in again and try to see the thread of like truth and perspective through whatever the subject is.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to We Appreciate Your Ears.
I wasn't really expecting the band to go anywhere. So, meaning like we weren't the band that was going to get girls by being in a band, and we weren't the band that made people dance. And we only made a record actually because you, Brad, invited us to go to the studio and be your backing band on a couple of songs. And it's like, oh.
Is that right?
Yeah. And so as
Really?
our payment, he paid for us recording 2 songs at David Vought's place. And so we recorded 2 of our own songs, and we're like, oh, that was easy. We could do 8 more of these for $600 and then we'd have a record. And so we did it. And so that idea of ambition, like we were really, really lucky, but I was always interested in the process much more than in kind of the public result. And I think I actually had more I knew pretty early on that being public wouldn't necessarily be really good for my psyche or for my creative process or my happiness. And ultimately it wasn't. But I've run into songs that I've written where like years later, I'm like, oh man, that was really good. But it was so satisfying to write it that I just forgot about it and moved on. And that idea that it's the product and it's supposed to get you somewhere and you're supposed to put it out and record it and do all these other things. I mean, I love performing and I love recording, but there's also something about the creative process that's like you get to explore a concept, or, you know, I used the phrase before, like write a letter from your future, better, wiser self to your current self and try to kind of expand your perspective and look back. And, you know, and so for me, it served that process. And I think there's not every artist. And there are people who are just really good craftspeople. There are people who are just exceptional, you know, exceptional musicians, or they're working harmonically, or they don't want to deal. Like, I think even in the band, like Dean is this exceptional craftsman of a musician. He knows how to put together sounds, arrangement. He can play any instrument from ear. He's astonishing that way. Todd is very, like, he is super emotional and evocative, but he doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't, you know, it's like, I can't stop talking, whereas Todd, like, doesn't want to talk if he doesn't have to, but he gets out everything that needs to get out emotionally in his playing. I've always been really fascinated by words, really fascinated by like emotional layering or complexity, by ambivalence, right? You know, holding contradictory emotions at the same time. And so it's just more how we express and where our interests are.
That's really cool to hear, Glenn, because you all are all my friends, and to hear you describe it like that, your relationship with those two guys really explains, you know, because I was a huge fan before I knew you guys. But just that perspective, to have that kind of thing in a relationship with a band where everyone kind of does, it's like, you know, the classic like Star Trek team. You have the one guy who's like on it with the controls here and knows this whole rig, and then you have the other guy, and then you have, you know, you're like kind of captaining it, but everyone's kind of crucial.
So is Dean or Todd Spock?
Yeah, right.
That's my question.
But yeah, who's who? We'll figure it out eventually.
Okay, we'll figure it out.
I'm going to work. I'll get back with you, you know, but I love that analogy because it really does take that to fly the ship. And those songs, like, and then you all sing, it's amazing. The three of your voices and your songs, and there's an excitement in it. And that just that comes from nothing, right? To some people, it's the biggest trip. They're just like, whoa, what? Like, how did you guys even begin to write that song or whatever? And
I mean, we just started writing because we were in theater together, and Todd had a station wagon, so I could throw my bike in the back, and he lived 2 blocks away, so I could get a ride home. And then I found out he could play Boston riffs, you know. So, but I think that desire to create. I mean, when I've taught songwriting, I really try to teach it more, less about, you know, structure and harmonic development. I mean, there's things about that, but more about keeping lyrics conversational, having it come out in terms of phrasing in a way that you would actually say something. Don't talk like Yoda, you know, write not songs like Yoda.
In this segment, we're going to hear Glenn talk about song structure and development.
Yeah, coming up, Glenn's going to tell us about when he was teaching a songwriting class and working through a song with a person who was writing about a relationship with his son.
And it's almost like you think of it as a load-bearing wall, is the metaphor I use. And you have to know what's load-bearing and what isn't. Like, right, when a builder walks into a room, they can kind of instinctually tell which walls are real and which are just barriers. Right. And I think in songwriting, people have like first line, second line, and then they'll go, oh God, I can't have a rhyme. And they'll do this convoluted fourth line to make it rhyme. But that second line isn't load bearing. The meaning is, but the word choice isn't. And like, you can rephrase that thing 100 different ways so you don't have to force line 4 to fit, right? And so there's questions like that are just structural and about, taking time to edit and taking time to sing over and over. But there's also things that are just contextual, like where he's telling me about the song. And it wasn't, a bad song, but it was just it said what it said. And then he told me about this story of his kid climbing this mountain and getting to this summit and discovering at the summit that he had cell service. And he called his dad. And that it was like this beautiful moment where he knows his son is out there. He's been worrying so much about their connection and who his son is in the world. And if he's getting through, if he's just like browbeating him, or if his son's actually hearing how much he cares. And in this moment, he knows his son cares. He knows his son reaches back to him when he's done this achievement that he's so proud of. And he's like tearing up, telling me about it. I'm like, why the fuck is this not in your song?
Right.
Like, where this is at least verse 3, if not bridge, if not the whole, and it's that weird thing of people get to the point in describing why they're writing a song where they choke up, and then they really purposefully avoid writing that part. And they avoid going there in the song. It's like I just thought it would be too much. And it's like, I feel like, there's a purpose two ways of the song. Part of it is your own evolution or spiritual journey and your own ability to wake yourself up and feel something deeply. But that if you achieve that, you probably, it will translate to other people and you'll take them through a similar journey. And so that same feeling, if you take yourself to the point where you're overwhelmed, that's not the point where you turn away. That's the point where the gold is.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to We Appreciate Your Ears, WAYE, Santa Barbara, New York, London.
I do think you want enough specificity that you believe in the setting of a song and you believe in the subject and what's being told, but then you want enough openness that it's not about one thing or one person. And, I like that I've had calls from people who were shocked that I wasn't a fundamentalist Christian because of songs like, Fly From Heaven, or, they're shocked that I'm not that. And I've had other people, about the same album, Dulcinea. It's like, isn't that song all about coming out of the closet and about and people can read into this, if it's about longing or about becoming something and being afraid of what you're that if it is situationally vague but emotionally specific, I think you hit on things that are true to people, and that there's a, I don't always hit that, but when I can, you're hitting on things that are universal. And so, art's trippy.
It seems like you sort of had a musical family. What about your parents? Did they play music? Was it music 24/7 in the Phillips household when you were a kid?
No, my mother can't carry a tune to save her life. Bless her heart. Not very musical. And my dad was probably a fairly mediocre clarinet and saxophone player. He had a C sax and a clarinet, and he could do this kind of bastardized version of Malagueño on the guitar.
When Glenn comes home with a guitar and starts writing a song, did the family go oh, Glenn, that's great, you should do more of that? Or was it Glenn, you got to sell that thing and get a real job?
Well, there was definitely a get a real job thing for a while. I mean, they were both in hard sciences. I'd say my dad was a little more go do what you love. And mom was more be responsible. And, good on both of them. But yeah, we skipped a generation. They were both PhD hard scientists. She was chemistry, he was physics. And he was also, though, a very, like I'd said before, just a universally curious person. And so the encouragement to be creative was there. And the encouragement, I think, just to be passionate about something and put work into something. Yeah, it was not necessarily a musical family, and it was certainly not a rock and roll family. My dad did have he liked Dire Straits. That was probably the most rock and roll that he would listen to. It was a lot of like Joan Baez and Simon and Garfunkel, Israeli folk music, and tons of show tunes. I grew up on Oklahoma and, Damn Yankees and Sound of Music. And
yeah, you kind of touched on this, Glenn, but when you do collaborate, because you've collaborated successfully so many times, you mentioned it's a private process in the beginning, but talk a little bit about like that, bringing the seed into somebody else's zone and being like, here, check this out,
collaboration is a really interesting thing because it's so different depending on who you're with. I think my favorite songs that I've written collaboratively are when somebody's had like the beginning of something, and it's really lucky when you get a song and you go like, oh, I know where that goes. I know what that's about. There's this song called Go on my last solo album that I wrote with this guy, Chris Orlick, and it's the only song we ever wrote together. And he just had this melody. And you know which way to go. And he just had that. And I was, going through divorce, and I just heard this podcast that was about foghorns and how foghorns are this way of saying, foghorns and lighthouses say I love you in a different, like usually you hear I love you, come closer, hold me, and foghorns and lighthouses say I love you, you should be over there. And you should stay away. Right. I care about you. I want the best. Go away.
Right.
And I was feeling that was the message I was getting at the time. I was trying to understand it. And so for me, like that song just went into this song trying to inhabit, my former wife's point of view and start from there. And it's fictionalized and it goes in other directions. But it's like I was in deep rejection and she was trying to make it clear that it was ending because she loved me and she didn't want to hate me. And that if we stayed together, she thought it would get there. And so that song for me was this way of trying to, okay, I'm going to jump into those shoes for a while. And that little bit he had, that one line, you know which way to go, set me off on a process. And it was pretty easy to write. So a lot of collaboration. I love it, and there's songs, what's interesting in Toad, like Todd or Dean, when Todd does a song, usually comes in with like a lot of the time he'll have, especially the old Toad stuff, it would be like he would have like syllable sounds. And so I would end up like trying to rhyme with his syllable because it would sound really good on that high note going, I, and so I'm trying to rhyme with kind of nonsense. But sometimes there'd be words in there and so it'd be like, something has gone wrong.
Wow, that was one of those? Wow.
And yeah, something's always wrong, fall down, crazy life. And it would literally be that one line where I'm like, oh, that's the chorus. And so take that, but then figure out what it means and like write a lyric and a story and a character around it and try to figure out, when we did New Constellation, Dean had written the music and had the demo for Is There Anyone Out There? And is there anyone out there? Taking in, information, interpreting it, and then concocting this language that just barely allows us to kind of convey what we perceive and how much we're actually missing in conversation, like how imperfect language is. Because it could be like, is there anyone out there who feels the way I do? It could be a very kind of, I'm so alone. And I wanted to go nerdy with it and have it be more like, I don't know, more psychological, neurological. And sometimes something comes in and there's no word in it that's like sparkly to me, but the music's great. And so I'll pick that up. And I've done I'm trying to think of like songs where I usually, if I start something, I end up finishing it. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think of songs where that I really liked that I co-wrote where it was my start, like where I was stuck on something. And I think I'm better at getting inspired by something and seeing what works and what doesn't and going, oh, yeah, let me rearrange that and make it. Like, that's really exciting for me.
Yeah, well, you're great at it, man. That's awesome. It's so cool. That process is wild. And and I had no idea about a lot of that stuff. It's just cool to get the backstory on your process and And,
yeah, it's like Todd, like Crazy Life is another one. I'd been reading In the Spirit of Crazy Horse by, all about Leonard Peltier, and Todd came in with this thing, Crazy Life. And I'm thinking, In the Spirit of Crazy Horse, Crazy Life. It's like this crazy back, and it just kind of found its way into the material that was happening right then.
But like that melody, like da 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 da.
That's all Todd.
That's so pretty, and then da 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 da. It's just so pretty, and that's really cool to hear. Thank you for sharing that. Brad, you have a cool question.
When I listen to your songs, they often feel like they're speaking for the way I feel. Like you've captured a notion that I as a listener, I can kind of make it my own. When you write a song, do you think about the listener and what you want to bring to them, or do you just think about the song, or do you also think how somebody will be hearing it when they hear it? Because that seems like would have to be part of creating it.
I think more about the listener than I used to. I tend to be thinking mostly about the song or what's interesting to me, and wanting, asking myself if I'm being lazy in whatever I'm exploring. And I feel like on the early Toad stuff, I got away with a lot. And there's a lot you can get that feels like art because it's obfuscating, if that makes sense. Like you throw in stuff that's confusing, and if nobody can figure it out, you can get away with it. And so I feel like there was a decent amount of that early on, but I was a kid, and that's okay. And sometimes that also works where you don't really know what it's about. But I mean, there's this song on the new album that's all from these titles I got from the songwriting game. It's called Call the Moon Dust. And it's like, okay. I actually went on the net and was like looking at stuff about moon dust. And so like verse 2 is almost very literal. It's about, the corrosive nature of moon dust and the way it kind of blows across. And it's somehow I have some character getting stranded on the moon. And the first verse is more about, this idea of magic. When I think of like religion or, historic people talking about Kali Yuga or whatever, it's like this idea of narrating and creating these vast spiritual epics as opposed to just looking at the absolute beauty of the world as it is, right?
Yeah.
Things are stunning and unknowably complex, and you don't really need to pretend it's stuff. And then the third verse goes into like this weird string theory. There's a chapter in The Elegant Universe by Brian Greene that takes the Rumi quote of everything is music, the place where everything is music. And just that at the, ground level of what matter is made of is harmony and is this vibration or these strings beating, and that, taking that into this, it's a lot like the Sufi poems of this idea of, this universe. The universe is a song, and it's this infinite harmony that's forever changing, forever moving, and everything is just, part of this glorious piece of music. I don't know if it makes sense if you look at the three verses together, but somehow the song really works. And so there's something in the way it leads up to this emotional release at the end that's this nearly DMT-like. I wanted to have it sound like DMT at the end.
Wow.
And have it kind of, break into this ecstatic openness.
That's awesome.
And so So there's songs like that kind of shouldn't work but do. There's songs that are...
Can we hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Call the Moon Dust.
We're going to play it and then right here.
You can call it magic, you can make believe, or just find the beauty in the things you see, in a rosy sunset or a blooming flower, in the subtle shifting of a single hour, in the eyes that catch yours from across the hall. There is nowhere to perceive it all. light as it eats the seals around your vacuum packs and corrodes the workings of your capsule's hatch to leave you stranded there upon that lesser globe. There is nowhere for you to get back home. You can bow to science if it serves your need to pretend you understand a single thing, as the song of God is strummed on plant plate strings, and the angels drumming with their beating wings to the song that was the birth of everything. There is nowhere, there is nowhere, there is nowhere to resist. You must join and sing.
The new album, There's So Much Here by Glen Phillips, comes out next month, November 4th, 2022.
Yeah, hey, and so Glenn let us hear a preview of the record, and it's a fantastic album. So no matter when you're listening to this podcast, make sure to check out There's So Much Here by Glen Phillips.
There's this element of like, well, what are you trying to achieve and do? And I used to answer that with, I'm just trying to make art that I like. I'm trying to make myself happy. And then there's been times where I've noticed I've made albums where it's like, I want people to notice that I'm smart and interesting. And because I feel like Toad was always treated as this kind of milquetoast band. And, you know, in the press, right? The cool people didn't like us. And so wanting to like prove something or have somebody see me. And then
Okay, wait. This perception is one I never saw. I was their manager, and I was always proud to manage Toad because everyone I met thought they were authentic and real and serious, and even at times gnarly. Like, Zach, check out this chorus from their first album, Bread and Circus. It's the song Know Me.
Yeah, it's great. You know, as the years have gone by, Glen has been able to remain curious and keep reevaluating what he's doing and why he's doing it. It's really inspiring.
And now, back to We Appreciate Your Ears, episode 11 with Glen Phillips.
Okay, let's get back to our conversation.
When you came in, you played us two songs from your upcoming album, right? This is a Glen Phillips solo album. And when is it actually going to be available for the public?
It's out on November 4th. It's called There Is So Much Here. And all the songs were written from prompts. This guy, Matt the electrician in Austin, has a little songwriting game, and there's like 20 of us, and every week he sends out a prompt, and we all try to write a song.
You've kind of gone in a different direction with this based on the prompts. Do you think the prompts made it lighter?
Part of it is maybe the prompts. It's not all, bubbles and clouds and angels, but I realized doing this album, and I mean, in the meantime, we did the last Toad record where there was kind of my final, there's a song called Transient Whales that actually was also from the songwriting group. But
Great song, love that.
Thank you. And that was, I feel like, that's my last song about that chapter. That's like, felt like the last song in that. And then this record, getting these songs together, once again, it's my friend John Askew was like, hey, I've had your gear at my studio for a few years. I think I owe you a record. Like, come up and record. We'll have fun.
Oh, cool.
So, and I was like, okay, I guess I have all these songs I'll look and see if there's good songs there. And like, I put them together. I originally thought it was going to be 2 albums, like one kind of rock album and one kind of weird album. But they all fit together, and then looking back on it, it's like, so there's some of this is about like lockdown and like finally letting my partner, now my fiance, in and not running away, like the part of my heart that had shut down and was in hiding and didn't want to get hurt again, like finally opened up again. And like looking in retrospect, it's like, oh God, this album's about like falling in love, and this album's about like slowing down and I kind of will write the songs, like I said, and then forget about them. And I only came back to some of these because I was making a record. And it's like, okay, there's the theme. So it was like going through the notebooks and the emails of, sending these songs out. And it was like after the fact, I got to look at it and go, that's really great. I think I turned a corner.
Yeah.
I like starting with a lyric a lot of the time more than a melody because...
Yeah.
Words, I mean, this is a thing I learned from my friend Lisa Littlebird.
Yeah.
It was when I first started learning about how you teach these things some. And her whole thing was making a little pocket song of like, if you need to hear something, here's how you write that quick song for it.
Right.
It's like, I'm going to get through this day no matter what. I'm going to get through this day no matter what. Like you can, it's already kind of, I'm going to get through this day no matter what. It gives you its rhythm, and it even gives you its melody. It gives you its inflection.
Right.
And you can start playing with it if I'm singing it and I'm angry, if I'm singing it and I'm strident, if I'm singing it and I'm sleepy. And back to that idea of things being conversational. It's when that phrase and its melody are linked. And so for me, it's why sometimes it's the melody first, and it's much harder for me to do.
Right.
It's really hard work. It's kind of easy when you're starting with words, when you're starting with some phrase. And a lot of the time I'll start writing in some direction and a phrase will come up, and the phrase feels better than whatever it was I was actually trying to write about. And so I just switch gears and I write, you write that song. You write the song that works instead of the song you wanted to.
That's so smart. That's so smart. Yeah, because sometimes the verse that you thought was the thing isn't, and the chorus that just flew out of it is now suddenly the star. Right?
Yeah, and you just save, if the other concept's good, you save it for another day. Come back to it, but let like the song that wants to happen and give it the respect. I like doing it from a phrase because it's just like the melody is always just sitting there in it already. Saves a lot of plumbing.
That's awesome. What a great way to...
I never thought of that before, but you take a phrase and you can sing it like stridently or sleepy, and that would actually maybe change the rhythm and the melody just of the same phrase.
Yeah. It's like that theater exercise where you look at somebody and you go, I love you.
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 Yeah. And then I love you.
Yeah.
But it's that thing of like you say the same phrase back and forth and you have a conversation saying the same thing, and it's like looking at that and, how are you going to play it?
All of a sudden I'd find myself like at a restaurant and be ordering, and the person would say something like, oh, we've got a special on mango iced tea, and I'd be, you have a special on mango iced tea. And they'd be like, wait, they would really respond to you because all of a sudden you're throwing that repetition, what do they call it? Repetition practice or something like that.
Yeah. It's like, are you my therapist?
Yeah, it was amazing.
Am I your therapist?
You know, Glenn, it is an absolute privilege and honor to have your wonderful soul in my studio with Brad and myself. And thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Really, genuinely.
So fun to be in here again.
Oh, anytime, always welcome. You know where I am. And I feel like I learned a lot. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
This is Brad Nack.
And this is Zach Madden of We Appreciate Your Ears. Brought to you by WAYE, Santa Barbara, New York, London. Bye, Brad.
Okay, bye, Zach.